Everyone, I had a question asked, which accessories work the best to support the main lifts? So this is a good question and a very hard one to answer. So I'll try to keep this brief and not talk for an hour. So when you're choosing accessory exercises, this is going to depend on what's the purpose of what are you trying to achieve from doing the specific accessory exercise. So I've broken down the reason you could be using an accessory exercise into 4 different components, I guess we'll call it. The first one will be from the obvious of improving strength or performance on the main lift. However, this is quite hard because it's difficult to actually measure that if you're putting some sort of exercise variation. So if you regularly do a sumo deadlift and now you're putting a conventional deadlift in because you feel that that may help, or you read somewhere online that that's going to help improve performance on your sumo deadlift, or whatever other exercise variations there are. You might do some squat variation. You might do like a front squat to improve your back squat or something like that. Not saying that these don't improve strength on these movements, but it's going to be very hard to directly measure that. Is your strength improving because you introduced some sort of exercise variation in your training? So was it the variation? Was it maybe because you changed your volume? Was it because you changed your rep ranges? Are you eating better? Are you sleeping better? There's going to be so many things that come into play that's going to affect your strength on your main lifts that it's really, really hard to measure. I guess the best, it's going to be, I guess, very subjective on your behalf, but just being very aware of what's happening. So what I mean by that, if you're doing a lot of if you're tracking your training, what I like to use is estimated 1RM. If you're not too sure how to use estimated 1RM to track your progress, I've made a video. If you scroll back on my Instagram, it's called How to Measure Strength and Hypertrophy Progress. If you watch that, there's a bit in that how I use estimated 1RM. But just to briefly go over that, when you put in your sets, reps, and repetitions in reserve or RPE, this will give you an estimated 1RM. It's not totally accurate, but what we can use the estimated 1RM for, if that is slowly increasing over time, then that's probably a sign that you're getting better. Now, again, I just talked about those other variables, sets, volume, stress, and whatnot, which can affect your strength. But let's say if everything is held pretty constant, and every time you put in a specific accessory movement, let's say every time you do front squats within your program in conjunction with your back squat, you tend to see your estimated 1RM maybe goes up a little bit quicker than usual. And then when you take that exercise out, maybe the rate in that increase slows down a little bit, and then later on when you put it back in again, then you see that rate goes up again. So if you're seeing that your strength appears to be improving every time you put a particular exercise in, and then you take it out, put it back in again, then that might be a little bit of a good sign that that particular exercise is effective for you. And that's another thing to go off, that particular accessory exercises may be effective for one person and may not be so effective for another person. Potentially, there might be a particular exercise that someone is weak in, maybe like their hip extension in a deadlift. Their hip extension strength is weak, and you might find when that person performs hip thrusts, that improves their hip extension strength, which carries over to improving their deadlift strength. However, you might find that someone who has really strong hip extensors and weak knee extensors. They might do that same hip thrust, but they don't just get the same out of it relative to that person who had that weak hip extensors. So that's just one example, but I'm just trying to show that how those accessory movements, it's going to, different people are going to respond to that same movement. So I kind of went on a side tangent, but just going off, just as I said, it's going to be a little bit hard to measure if an accessory movement is effective or not. But again, if you kind of just regularly track your training, and if you can see this pattern happening, that you see your strength that just appears to spike on a particular lift, your squat or deadlift, when you are doing that particular accessory movement, again, that might be a sign that that movement is good for you. The next category to why you might use a accessory lift is to improve technical proficiency. So what I would do is, someone, for example, has an issue with their chest falling forward when they perform a squat. They get down to the bottom, and as they come up, you see this chest fall, the hip shoot up, and they just can't seem to get it right. What I might do is give them a movement which makes them have to work really hard to maintain that chest angle. For example, I might give them a pause squat, because with that, it's going to, I guess we can call it reward good movement, because when you get in that bottom position, if you can hold that pause squat, well, that's going to reward you, because your squat is going to look really good and you're not going to fall forward. However, at the same time, it's going to punish like a bad movement. Because you're doing that pause squat, if you are going to fall forwards, well, you're going to be more sensitive to that forward falling feeling. And the forward falling is probably going to be a little bit more exaggerated when you're doing that pause. So movements that, as I said, rewards good movement, rewards that kind of position that you are aiming to be in, and again, punishes when you don't achieve that movement. Another example I'll give quickly: if someone is having trouble with keeping extension in their spine when they're doing a deadlift, and they find they're just getting a rounded back when they break the barbell off the floor, potentially what they could do is some paused deadlifts, just kind of mid shin. So it's going to force them to have to keep that isometric contraction in their back extensors when they go up, maintain that spine position, and then come up. If they can't hold it, well, when they get to that bottom position, they're all going to be rounded and hunched over, and they're probably going to be more sensitive to that feeling of feeling more rounded and hunched over. So, can use accessory exercises to improve technical proficiencies on the main lifts. The next one, this is kind of going back to improving strength, but sometimes that's providing a novel stimulus relative to what you're regularly doing may help improve strength. So if you were just to do the same exercise over and over and over and over again, you're doing that exact same movement pattern, sooner or later you will kind of desensitize to that movement pattern, and your rate of progress will probably start to plateau a little bit out, unless you change something, you do some sort of variation. This can even be meaning doing the same sets and same reps, not even just the exercise variation. Doing that over and over, you'll desensitize to that stimulus, and you're going to need some sort of variation to help kind of give your body something new to adapt to. And then when you adapt to that new thing, you'll find that you'll kind of resensitize to that old thing that you used to be doing that you got desensitized to. So when you go back to it, you can start making gains back in, what you were doing previously. So if you're kind of like saying doing that same competition squat 3 times a week, and you find that you were just not getting any stronger, you're changing your repetitions, you're changing your sets, and you just can't seem to get any stronger, maybe it's time to introduce some sort of novel stimulus. maybe do a front squat. If you're usually doing a low bar squat, maybe do a high bar squat, maybe do some pin squats, pause squats. You don't necessarily have to, and I wouldn't suggest taking your competition squat totally out. But as I said, if you're squatting 3 times a week, maybe 2 of those squats could be some sort of squat variation, and then you keep your competition squat in. Again, you're providing a novel stimulus for your body to adapt to, and then it might resensitize you in making gains back in your competition squat. And then the last one I will point out is for working around injuries. So it's common that people will get injured and then they feel that they believe they totally can't train. It gets scary. Like, you hurt yourself and then you get anxiety, like, I don't want to further hurt myself. I don't want to make this injury worse and then take more time off training. And then we fall into this kind of like fear avoidance trap. However, there's typically, if you, with a bit of trial and error, you will probably find there is some sort of movement variation which is similar to your competition lift, which significantly reduces the pain that you may be experiencing, or maybe takes away the pain totally, so you can still kind of be exposed to a similar movement pattern and still make adaptations that are similar to your competition lift, which actually may help to improve your competition lift strength, and not totally doing it at all. An example that I'll give you, if you have like a shoulder injury and you can't do a barbell back squat, maybe you can't even do a front squat, maybe your shoulder is just really bad, but you still need to get that squatting movement pattern in, then what you can do is a belt squat. So when you're wearing, they got a belt squat machine, but not all people have that. So you can kind of wear a dip belt with weights between your legs. You can get 2 steps and you can perform squats in that way. It takes the load off the shoulders. However, you're still doing that pretty much exactly the same squat movement pattern. Another example that you might find is, a sumo deadlift generally increases the torque placed on the knees, so there'll be a little bit more demand on the knees. If you have a knee injury, you might find that doing 1 day sumo deadlift and 1 day a conventional deadlift, because a conventional deadlift generally reduces the stress played on the knees, that might be a way for you to still get adequate deadlifting volume in without overly stressing some knee injury that you might have. And then from that, let's say your regular lift is a conventional deadlift, and you find that doing a conventional deadlift twice a week just really beats up your knee, but you can maybe get away with it for once a week. What you can potentially do is 1 day you do a conventional deadlift, and on the other day you're doing like a stiff leg or RDL deadlift. So you're taking out that kind of knee flexion extension movement out, and it's just more of a hip hinge. You're still getting kind of like a similar movement pattern of that deadlift there, whilst reducing stress on your knee. So just to summarize, the 4 things that you potentially might use accessory exercises: improve strength on your main list, which we all want to do. Going from that, I didn't talk about that. You might be trying to improve, increase strength of a weakness on an area that you've identified which is weak, and you just might want to add a little bit of extra volume on a weak area. Again, you might find that your hip extensor strength is quite low, so you might increase the volume of hip extension type movements. The second on that was to improve technical proficiency. The third one might be introducing a novel stimulus, so you can kind of resensitize to an old training stimulus that you were providing, so you can kind of get some strength gains later on, and then also to work around injuries. So with that, I hope that kind of gave you a few things to think about. That, well, the purpose of this is there is no best accessory exercise. It's going to depend on the goals and the needs of the individual, what they respond to and what they don't respond to. So it's going to kind of be a little bit of trial and error over time. Make sure you are taking training logs, even maybe use a little training diary, so you can kind of develop or just kind of accumulate a bunch of information, because then from this past information you might be able to kind of see some trends and patterns which might kind of emerge in showing you what accessory exercises work best for you.